This is Tirana's Acre Forward, the ag industry's most thought-provoking podcast. Listen to interesting people as we go in-depth into the issues affecting crop advisors, growers, and farm communities, uncovering the truth about the ag business and using technology to prepare for the unforeseeable. Ready to explore the future? Let's dig in.
Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Acre Forward podcast. I'm Steve Patterson with Tirana, your host for today, and our special guest today is Nick Thomas, who is president and founder of a company called Steward Link. Nick, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Well, Nick, what I would like to do is I'd like to start with just kind of an outline. Start with who is Steward Link? What do you do as a company and what problem do you solve? And then we'll talk about how you got there, your background and your interest in conservation and all these type of things. But let's start with, who is Steward Link and what do you do and what problem do you solve for agriculture?
Sure. So Steward Link is a consulting service focused primarily on conservation programs. We have found that over the last few years, and it probably even goes back further than that, but conservation programs has become a fairly complex field to navigate for farmers, private landowners. You don't even necessarily have to be farming. Just a guy who maybe enjoys recreation from hunting and fishing, managing timber, those type things. There are just a world of conservation programs available, and it's so complex that guys just really don't know, even how to start to pursue those programs or which one they benefit from the most. So Steward Link, our goal is to help them navigate that process and hopefully, find the right fit and meet the requirements to be eligible for those programs and, hopefully receive the maximum benefit to meet their goals for their property or maybe their farming operation. So, that's what Steward Link works every day to do. And we found that's a very needed service, across the country, everywhere we've been, and, steadily growing, and just people call every day looking for help. So we know there's a big need out there. And, you mentioned the problem we're trying to solve, and I mean, that's it. I find that most farmers just really want to farm. They don't necessarily enjoy dealing with USDA or filling out a lot of paperwork and trying to understand what's the best fit for them. And it's it's a service that we find is needed across the country.
Now, that's great. And, you and I had an opportunity to speak at the Top Producer Summit in Kansas City, and you were telling me quite a bit about Steward Link, and I'm like, wow, because what you just described was my vision of conservation in USDA and NRCS is they have these programs and they have dollars available, but a lot of people just tend to shy away from them because there's either misconceptions about them or they perceive it's too difficult, and maybe it is too difficult, but that's where you all can step in and help with that process.
That's right. It is fairly difficult. I worked for USDA for 12 years, and obviously that background is what's allowed me to create Steward Link, just having that knowledge. And of course, we've got a staff here that some of the guys here are former USDA employees as well. But it's very complex and it's always changing. And, it's not even just USDA. There are state programs available. There are carbon credit sequestration programs available. And, we've got a lot of climate smart grants that are being administered by different organizations now. So, there's just so many options out there, and they pay, different payment rates for different practices. Some of them can overlap, some of them can't. Different programs have different payment limitations. I'm learning all the time myself, and I make a living doing this. So, imagine the farmer who walks through the door of USDA, he really doesn't even know where to start. Maybe he just goes in and asks what's available. And, a guy was in Ohio talking to a group of farmers. It's probably been 3 weeks ago. And it was kind of funny. He told me he called 5 USDA offices and asked the same question. And he got 6 different answers. And, that's pretty common. And that's not to take a shot at USDA, because those guys have so much on them and it's always changing. There's a lot to manage from those offices because I've been on that side of it, and I know what they're up against. There's some understaffing issues, and just to get the training out in a timely manner, the different farm bills as things change. You got the Inflation Reduction Act new pools of money that have separate ranking pools. It's just a lot to understand and navigate, and you really got to stay on top of it. Even myself and the guys here in our office, to really understand how to maximize that.
You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, and if I remember right, there was an additional $19 billion or maybe $20 billion available for conservation as part of that. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, 19.5 billion. Allotted for conservation programs over the next couple of years here. And, that's going to make a huge difference for conservation programs. When people see that, they read about that in different magazines, publications, that all this money is available. But how do you access it? That's the key. How do you fill out all the paperwork that's necessary to make that fit your farming operation? I think a big part of what StewardLink does and does well is we don't necessarily try to guide a farmer into doing anything he doesn't want to do. Right. We don't try to push him to a level he doesn't want to be at. We just really want to understand what he's doing now and, hopefully bring those practices up to the USDA standard. And then, see what we can do to maximize that and hopefully incentivize him to bring his conservation to a different level. There's just tons of examples, but, Tyrannus is a great example and the Acre Forward service. That's a great technology. And, I'm just so impressed with the capabilities of that to scout every acre of an operation. And there are some great incentives through USDA and other programs to get guys to adopt that practice where otherwise they just wouldn't do it. And very likely due to the cost of maybe it's cover crops, maybe it's Acre Forward or, any other practice because, this might not be the right thing to say, but it's just honest. But we can talk about conservation all we want to. Farmers are going to look at their bottom line. If
sure.
It doesn't make them money, they're not likely to do it.
Sure.
And that's the reason for these USDA programs. We've got to incentivize private landowners to get them to adopt practices with the hope that they'll see the benefit and realize that it actually does make them money. No-till is a great example. Here in the Mississippi Delta, there's been very little no-till, but we're starting to see some of that. 10 years ago, you couldn't see cover crop anywhere in the Mississippi Delta in the fall. Well, now we're starting to see cover crop. Well, that's because conservation programs have incentivized that, and now guys are starting to see the benefit of it. So, conservation programs work. We just got to, get guys enrolled in it, let them see the benefit for themselves, and then hopefully they'll adopt it.
That's great. And, most of my career has been on the East Coast, and we were always dealing with Chesapeake Bay, the estuaries, the rivers flowing into the bay, into the ocean, nutrient management plans, cover crops, no-till, very common in a lot of Virginia and Kentucky, different areas up and down the coast. But if I heard you right, I think one thing to say, though, to make clear is the programs, USDA, NRCS, the programs have good intentions. They have good intentions. Now, they become cumbersome for all kinds of reasons, but the intentions are good. The second thing is, if I heard you right, well, the second thing is a lot of farmers, in my experience over the years, they're all good stewards. They want to be good stewards. And this is just helping them take that step forward. But I have a question, and that is, say I'm in Eastern Virginia or Eastern Carolinas, whatever, and I put cover crops out in the fall, and I've been doing it for 10 years, 15 years, whatever, because I know the benefit. But I never messed with all that stuff. It's too complicated. Do you get help for a practice that you're already doing, or does it have to be a new practice?
That's a good question, and that comes up a lot. So very likely you can. There's a couple of different things to consider. Nutrient management is a good example. Let's use that to start with. So when we say nutrient management, there's a good chance everybody is doing some level of nutrient management. The question is, are you meeting the USDA standard? So, there's a very specific standard that we have to follow and meet that varies for each state. USDA relies on the land grant university in that state to give them recommendations on, how much different nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potash we can put out there. So we have to make sure we're in line with that. We find that normally a guy, he may be doing a great job, but there's something that he probably isn't doing. It might even be from a documentation standpoint, or maybe it's the, intervals he takes soil samples that he isn't quite up to that standard. So we can usually change just a few things to get him in line with that standard and qualify for that practice. The other thing we have to consider when you talk about cover crops, is the lifespan of a practice. Well, the lifespan for cover crops is 1 year. So even though you did it last year, you don't necessarily have to do it next year. So, you can still apply for that practice and apply it again. Now, you can talk about seeding rates, timing of the termination. There's a lot of different factors to consider. Maybe a guy's planting 30 pounds of cereal rye for his cover crop now, where USDA is going to require that he plant 40 pounds. So, those type things, we have to make sure we're in compliance with the USDA standard, communicate that well to our clients, the farmers, make sure they understand, and then, of course, document those practices. But we find that normally we can find some practices that a guy would absolutely benefit from.
I'm sure. I mean, as I told you when we talked back in Kansas City, to me, this is a huge opportunity. It's just a huge opportunity. I wouldn't be surprised at all if you're not swamped, you and your team are not swamped, and as awareness continues to grow.
So we stay swamped, and that's been amazing to me. As Stewart Link started back in 2015, I had no idea how big it would become. We've really just kind of grown organically over the last 9 or 10 years. And when I first started, the first few years, I didn't have a business card. We certainly did. Zero marketing, and just by word of mouth. We were just. My phone was ringing off the hook. We spread all across Mississippi, and even to other states, and then. As we've added people and more staff and gotten more organized with our process and tried to start expanding, one of the challenges we found is, NRCS specifically or USDA, we could say, they don't operate exactly the same from state to state. And all I knew was Mississippi. I knew how we did it here in Mississippi. So, I was a little naive and just assumed that each state operated the same. Well, I found out that wasn't true. And, we figured out kind of how to deal with that as we go into different states. But it's been a lot of fun to travel across, different parts of the country and just talk with farmers and hear what the challenges are. I'm still just amazed. CSP, Conservation Stewardship Program, has been around, I think, since 2004 was the first year that it became available. And I talk to farmers all the time who have never heard of it. And that's just amazing to me.
One of the biggest challenges, and Sarah and I, the marketing director for Tyrannus, we talk about that. One of the biggest challenges for all companies is awareness, right? Because there's so much coming at everybody. And how do you cut through all the noise and say, here's who we are, here's what we do, here's the problem we solve, here's how we can help you. And, it takes, I always say marketing is a battle for the mind. And, and it is, but obviously, and you mentioned earlier, word of mouth is one of the best ways. It's one of the best marketing there is. So, but let me ask you another question, which is, what drove your interest, in conservation over all the years? You worked for NRCS, you're a conservationist, you led, your area led the group out in Mississippi with most plans and all those types of things. What inside you drives you to do this?
Yeah, well, I would say it probably just goes back to, to my childhood and growing up and just my interest. I grew up on a family farm here in Mississippi. My mom and dad and uncle, they farm around 1,000 acres of cotton, corn, and beans. So, I just grew up on tractors and around farming and hunting and fishing and just, everything outdoors. That's just always been my interest and, just being a part of the agriculture community here in Mississippi. And then, went to Mississippi State, and when I graduated, had the opportunity to take a job with NRCS and just understanding more about what's available and, just seeing the difference it makes for people, when they get to benefit from these practices. There's so many great things that people want to do that they just can't quite afford to do. I enjoy the wildlife stuff as much as the ag side of things. I'm a big hunter. Maybe it's managing a stand of timber to go do some hack and squirt or hinge cutting or that type stuff. It takes some capital to do that. And USDA may pay enough money to completely offset the cost of that. The farmer doesn't necessarily, or the landowner, they may not gain financially, but they improve the habitat on their land tremendously, and then they see the benefit of that. So something they've been wanting to do for years that they never thought they'd be able to do, and then just the ability to provide them an opportunity to do that, and seeing how that excites people and benefits their land is rewarding. And it's just been a great career path for me, and I've enjoyed it. And just seeing the needed service, it has been overwhelming at times. So we have a lot of demand for the service, and we've been very blessed. So we try to manage it as best we can.
Nick, we were talking a few minutes ago. You mentioned Tyrannus. When I started working with Tyrannus a few months ago, I back to who are you? What do you do? What problem do you solve? And how I describe it a lot of times, and it's tied to conservation, is if you think about it, the grower, the farmer, and ag retail have been working together for years to help each other be successful. And everybody knows that. But once the dust settles of spreading fertilizer and lime and the crop emerges, neither party really knows what's going on in that field to the extent they would like to. And this leads to less than ideal decision-making with crop inputs. And so that can have economic impact and environmental impacts. And that's one reason I am so excited about Tyrannus, because it ties right into everything that we're talking about. And, I'm really excited about that. And we've got a call in March with the EPA. We're talking to NRCS in Washington. We're talking with USDA. We're talking with a number of people, because just like StewardLink, everybody needs to know what we're doing.
That's right.
It's beneficial to so many people.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That the Tyrannus service is just unbelievable. And, it's exactly what USDA incentivizes. Our country has been blessed with such great natural resources, and we need to be good stewards of that. And that's the kind of thing that USDA wants to do. We don't want to put pesticides across our fields when they're not needed. We need to be able to go out there and put them exactly where they need to be placed. And Tyrannus allows us to do that. The technology is just unbelievable in farming these days, the equipment. But in a lot of places, it's very underutilized. It's not adopted at the level that it could be. And it gets back, in my opinion, to that bottom line for the farmer. It costs money to use these type services. And it's not just the scouting side of it, it's the application side of it. You have to have the technology on your spray equipment, to make those subfield applications or those variable rate applications. So, everything costs money to do that. And that's the reason that USDA incentivizes that. And, you've got to be able to access it to get those incentives. And, that's a gap that StewardLink aims to fill and just, hopefully allow people to adopt some of that, from my point, I believe everybody wins. USDA wins, the farmer wins. StewardLink and USDA essentially have the same goal. USDA's, their goal is to help people help the land. And that's essentially what we do as well. We're trying to get as much conservation on the ground as we can. So, we're promoting conservation every day, just like they are. So we try to work hand in hand with those guys as much as possible.
Absolutely. Like we said, they have good intentions. But good intentions sometimes can end up being cumbersome for all kinds of reasons, and you will help solve that. So let's talk about some of the misconceptions out there that some of the growers may have, or that people in general may have about these type of programs. What are the misconceptions that you hear all the time?
Yeah, well, a lot of the primary ones, we probably hit on one. The biggest one earlier is people think, well, I'm already doing something, so I don't qualify. Well, there's a lot to be determined about that. That might be the case sometimes, but again, meeting that standard is the key. That's the part you have to do. But really, just people have a little bit of hesitation in dealing with the government in general. It seems like today, I think people they're worried that USDA is going to somehow have control over their land, or if I take this money from this conservation program, they'll end up wanting it back later, or they're going to get into my business, and I just don't want to deal with that. And I don't personally believe that's true. These practices have lifespans, and we need to read and understand our contracts and make sure we understand what we're doing. But there are USDA programs that's probably true. Easement programs, but that's not what we're after every day. EQIP and CSP are the two primary programs that we pursue. We'll help anybody with any program they're interested in. But these are working land programs, and they're really, the focus is to incentivize a higher level of conservation than what you're already doing. So I think really that all the paperwork that goes into it is really what keeps people from applying. It's a little bit, each state's a little bit different, but the timing of the application periods are all over the place. And, guys who are, maybe interested in looking at these programs, they're farming, they're growing their crop, they're going through harvest, and then they kind of get into winter. They slow down a little bit, hopefully, for the holidays. And then right after January 1, they've got, farm back on their mind. It's just like a whole different gear. And they start thinking, well, maybe I'll go check into these conservation programs. Well, they go to the USDA office and they find out the sign up deadline was back in November. They've already missed it. And then you get handed a file full of paperwork, 100 pages of fine print, read through this and come back and, we'll look at it for next year. Well, I mean, that gets thrown in the garbage every time.
Sure. Yeah.
Nobody's going to read through that, and they're already discouraged because, they can't do anything for the upcoming growing season. It's for the next growing season. So, it's just about timing and understanding what's available.
Okay. You mentioned it's kind of fear of big government.
Right.
But when I told some people recently that we're going to speak with the EPA about what Tyrannus is doing, someone said, "Are you sure?" I said, "The EPA doesn't want to ban everything. They want to optimize the use of crop protectants, nutrients, and all these type of, their goal is to protect the health and the environment. Who's against that? And so they need to know what you're doing. They need to know what Tyrannus is doing. And so that's part of the, building awareness. And you mentioned timing of things. I remember for a long time there was a part of the rule in Maryland was you couldn't apply nitrogen small grains before March 1st. And this is an example of the requiring people like us to sit down and explain how small grains work and why sometimes nitrogen may need to be applied February 1st or February 15th. But they don't know that. I'll never forget one time we were in Senator Warner's office in Virginia. And I said, "Have you all ever been down to one of our locations?" And they said, "Well, no." I said, "Why don't you come on down?" We took them to King William, Virginia, which is east of Richmond. And we have all the precision ag, equipment. We're doing all these things. We promote buffer strips, cover crops. We do all nutrient management. We do all these things. Well, they came down, we blew up all of our precision ag maps. We had them on easels and we walked them through everything. They crawled all over the machines. They just couldn't believe it. So there's a gap between the Beltway sometimes and what happens out here. But as you very well know, agriculture is complicated. Agronomy is complicated. And it takes an effort to explain to people, this is how it works. And this is why we might need to move this timing from here to here in the Southeast or whatever. So being proactive with these agencies is really important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's so important. And we've run into those type issues, across the different states. There are a couple of states that we really can't even apply for nutrient management in. And in NRCS, their standard, it speaks directly to what the land grant university recommendations are in that state. So, if that doesn't align with what farmers are doing, and I would argue that most farmers are doing an excellent job of nutrient management. Fertilizer is expensive. Those guys don't want to put out any extra fertilizer because that's another input cost. But at the same time, they're not going to give up yield to comply with the USDA standard. If it's close, maybe we can. But, if it's, 50 pounds of nitrogen or something, we can just forget it because it's not going to pay to do that. Again, it gets back down to that bottom line. So, I think there's some things to be worked through there and some conversations to be had between USDA and some of those land grant universities to make sure that we are up to date. Farming's, forever changing. We're getting better at it. And those dates of timing, look at when we're planting and harvesting now versus 30 years ago. It's very different here in Mississippi. So, I just think some of those standards could probably be updated to get more aligned with where we are today.
I totally agree. And what I've also found as you talk with whether state agencies or at the federal level, they're always willing to listen. My experience, I had the opportunity to testify to a congressional subcommittee on agriculture and conservation a few years ago. Abigail Spanberger was the chairwoman of that committee. And I talked through a lot of the things that we do in Virginia that my company did, Southern States Cooperative did to manage nutrients, to reduce leaching, to reduce erosion. And, the big thing was, how do we keep excess nitrogen and excess phosphorus from going into waters, period? The bay, the rivers, et cetera. And there's practices out there that really help do that. And we've talked about some of them today, but always more than willing to listen. And but it takes an effort to sit down and talk with them and explain it in terms that they understand. Before we wind it up, let me ask you, Nick, is there anything else you would like to share with the audience about StewardLink and that important work that you all are doing?
Yeah, well, I'll just say I really appreciate the opportunity to be on the podcast with you this morning, Steve. Tyrannus service is just great, and great technology, and I think something that'll continue to grow across the country. And we're excited about our partnership with Tyrannus, and the retailers that we're working with now. Again, understanding what a farmer does is so important. What he wants to do, what his goals for his operation are from a conservation standpoint. That's half of it. The other half is understanding how USDA operates in that state and what's available in that state, and just making all that match up to maximize the potential for that farmer is the key. I always kind of compare our service to the IRS and having a CPA. If you got a big farming operation, you don't necessarily have to hire a CPA. You could do your taxes on your own, but chances are you don't want to try to understand all the tax codes and try to navigate that on your own. You're going to hire a professional CPA who makes sure you do everything correctly and, have everything aligned and get the best, possible benefit out of that you can. So it's kind of the same for conservation programs. It's just, there's so much information, so much available. I find that we can easily pay for ourselves in most every situation just by maximizing the potential. So we're really excited about the service and just how the company's grown, and there's so much interest. We do have contracts now that we manage in 12 different states, and we've got applications and in other states as well this year. So we expect that number to increase quite a bit this year. But just the other day, I was sitting here in the office and a guy called from Pennsylvania, and he had heard about Steward Link. He had seen our website, and, wanted to know if there was any way that he could help us. And I mean, we talked about everything from entity structure to conservation programs and, FSA programs and payment limitations. And just, there's so much to navigate at USDA that guys need somebody who can help them, figure that out.
One thing we didn't mention that's great was your success-based structure. Let's just talk about that at a high level. So if I'm a grower and I say, you know what, there's all these dollars available, I don't know how to do it. I'm calling this company called Steward Link. How does that work?
Yeah. So from day one, we've kind of made it a rule around here. We're not going to charge anybody if we don't get them something. So I think that resonates really well with farmers and probably just anybody. We're not necessarily trying to sell them anything. We're going to put skin in the game with them, and we're going to work really hard to try to get them access to these programs. And, once they receive their payment, we invoice them for our fee at that point. So they're never going to get a bill from Steward Link unless they've received money. And that, that's a pretty easy sale. Most guys jump on that pretty quick. And we just take a lot of pride in doing that. We've talked about changing that a little bit because, obviously it takes, some expense on the front end to travel around and meet with people. And, just the cycle of these conservation programs takes time. We talk about the speed of government around here fairly regular. We're signing people up now who, after deadlines have passed, it's going to be a year before those applications will be assessed, and then maybe 6 months to a year later before they get a payment. So we're doing work right now where it may be a year and a half before we actually, make any money off that. But that's okay. We try to plan really well, and I just think it serves our farmers well and our private landowners to operate that way. So we take a lot of pride in doing that and just try to manage our business well to allow us to keep doing that.
Well, like I told you in Kansas City at the summit, that's a great strategy. It's a win-win for everybody. And by partnering with Tyrannus as well, there's the retailer can win, the grower can win, you all can win, and the environment can win. So it's a win-win for everybody. So I congratulate you on your entrepreneurship of seeing this a few years ago, seeing the opportunity and building a company out of it. And who knows where it can go. And again, as awareness continues to build and people understand your value proposition, I can see you really, really growing. And that's a testimony to you and your team.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, Steve. We feel like we have a great opportunity, and we've been blessed to have that, and we want to be a good steward of the opportunity and make Steward Link, hopefully obtain, whatever level of success we can. We think the bar could be set really high, and just working with USDA hand in hand is key, and we've been able to make some key connections there and have some really good relationships. The chief of NRCS is actually from right here in Mississippi, so I didn't really know Chief Cosby, up until a few years ago, but I've gotten to know him a little bit here over the last few years, and just a great guy. does a great job with USDA, and so proud to have somebody from Mississippi leading the agency right now. So, at the national level and really even at the state level, we always find that NRCS loves Stewart and Link, and they love that we're promoting conservation, help them implement the conservation programs, bringing new clients through the door. Where it always gets a little bit tough is at the local level. And again, I look, I love NRCS, enjoyed my time working there, work with those guys every day. But in defense of the local staff, in the counties, I mean, those guys are overloaded with programs and applications, and it is a lot to manage. So, our goal is to build relationships with those guys as well, and hopefully, help serve them just as much as we do the clients. So,
yeah, no, I'm sure it's a lot of work. It's a lot of detailed work that's required. So, Nick, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's been very informative. This podcast will be shown in a lot of places. acreforwardpodcast.com is one place that the viewers can go see it again, but it'll be promoted throughout the country. And once again, thank you so much for what you're doing for the environment and for agriculture. It's a big deal.
Yeah. Thanks, Steve. Really enjoyed it, and hope to talk with you soon.
Sounds great. Have a good day.
Okay. You too.
Bye-bye.